Hi everyone, this is Jim Rizoli here, and the topic of conversation that I'm going to speak about today has to do with the slave trade, which most people will acknowledge as something that is part of the history of many countries, including the United States. But I came across a really good article that I thought you would enjoy, written by actually a black man, and the name of this website here is We Thought They Were White.weebly.com. Okay, that's the name of the website. It's up here in my URL, but I'll put the website here bigger, so a bigger font so you can see it. I think it's important for you to look at that. Now again, this article, okay, this website here is written by a black fellow, so he named it We Thought They Were White, and it says here what it's about. An African American apologizes, right here, I'm going to make that in blue, you can see it better. An African American apologizes for misattributed perceptions of white racism against blacks perpetrated by Jews. Very interesting, because you're going to hear something here that you don't hear anywhere about the slave trade. All right? What you know about the slave trade is what the propagandists want you to know about it. And basically they're saying that white men went to Africa and took the slaves from Africa and brought them over to the United States and actually South America, even I think before the United States. But still, they were brought to both places in our neck of the woods anyway. And that was it. I mean, white men, white men. Who are these white men? That's the issue. Okay? Well, you're going to be, surprised to find out it wasn't just any white men. Okay? I'm going to get back here first of all and just show you who wrote the article here. His name is Dontel Jackson. All right? And notice what he says. I'll just give you a little bit of his introduction. He goes, "Hello, welcome to my website. We thought they were white. My name is Dontel Jackson," again, the man on the left. And like many African Americans, he was brought up in a culture deeply infused with propaganda designed to lay the blame for all of black race's ills on the white man. It was not until he began looking into the actual history of blacks, whites, and other races in America that he came to realize that many, if not most, of the resentment that African Americans harbor regarding a long history of abuse and exploitation has been intentionally misdirected by those who are most responsible for it, to shift the blame away from themselves as a people onto the white race who they regarded as their enemies. And he goes on to say here, the reality is that the white race had little to do with the slave trade that took our ancestors away from Africa and sold them into bondage in the New World. That crime was committed not by white Europeans, but by Jews who were engaged in transatlantic commerce between the Old World and the Americas, where they hoped to establish a new Jerusalem from which to rule the world by way of exploiting all races who were not members of their tribe of chosen people. In their efforts to accomplish that goal, the white race has been hoodwinked and been manipulated as unsuspecting pawns almost as much as the black race has been. Going on, I think it's important to see this. Blacks have been purposely misled by the Jewish people who, in previous centuries, built their fortunes in the transatlantic slave trade and who continue to manipulate and exploit us even today, because most black people make no distinction between Jews and whites. It is easy for the Jews to evade justice and escape the blame for the wrongs that they have inflicted on our people for centuries by convincing blacks that it was the white men who did it. In most cases, the vast majority of the white race had nothing to do with slavery or other crimes that have been committed against our people. Whites were and continue to be exploited and manipulated by the Jews, the same as blacks, and their race is even more hated by the Jew, where blacks are simply disregarded by the Jews with indifference, as are other races. We are all simply pawns to the Jews, who have no other use for us beyond being a source of profit to them and a weapon that can be used to help destroy whites, who they see as their sworn enemies, by encouraging us to breed with them until there are no longer any whites left. So, anyway, this man here, as I just showed, his name is Dontel Jackson. He's a black man. He wrote this article, this website actually, trying to explain to other blacks who he feels should know about this, and we all really should know about it. But anyway, that the blacks have been mistreated, and the blame has been put on whites. Now, interesting how the Jews don't consider themselves white. But if you look at most Jews today, they are white, aren't they? But again, the Jews are a religion, all right? They're a religion that is their own tribe. They feel they are separatist from everybody else in the world. And he brought out a really good point here when he said that their whole purpose right here, that they brought the transatlantic commerce between the old world, right here, in the Americas, where they hoped to establish a new Jerusalem from which to rule the world by way of exploiting all races who were not members of their tribe of chosen people. And that's the point. Today we call them Zionists, all right? The Zionists are these ones who feel they are the chosen people. And I'm sure other Jews who aren't Zionists might feel that way too. I don't really know. But I just know that today we have an elite group of Jews who are primarily Zionists, who want to see Jerusalem, okay, Israel, okay, be the new Jerusalem of the world, where they will rule this world. That's what they honestly feel. I mean, can you imagine that's what they feel? So anyway, this whole article that he writes here is dealing with that. He explains, all right, and I'm going to get into some points about how the Jews controlled the slave trade, all right? And some people might say, wow, this is anti-Semitic. Well, it really isn't. When you name a group of people that are responsible for doing something wrong, it really isn't anti-them as much as let's expose who are doing the wrong. All right? Now let's go up to here. We're going to go into the Jews and the slave trade. All right? And just cover a couple points here, because a lot of people don't understand that the Jews are responsible for the slave trade 100%. All right, notice what it says here. According to an interview given by Orthodox Rabbi Lodi van de Kamp of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency newspaper on December 26, 2013, here's what he said. Money was earned by Jewish communities in South America, partly through slavery, and went to Holland, where Jewish bankers handled it. In one area of what used to be Dutch Guiana, 40 Jewish-owned plantations were home to a total population of at least 5,000 slaves, he says, known as Joden Savan, or Jewish Savannah. The area had a Jewish community of several hundred before its destruction in a slave uprising in 1832. Nearly all of them immigrated to Holland, bringing their accumulated wealth with them. Notice the next point. They came with ships carrying African blacks to be sold as slaves. The traffic in slaves was a royal monopoly, and the Jews were often appointed as agents for the crown in their sale. They were the largest ship chandlers in the entire Caribbean region, where the shipping business was mainly a Jewish enterprise. The ships were not only owned by Jews, but were manned by Jewish crews and sailed under the command of Jewish captains. Very interesting point. So this West India Company, all right, right here, I'll show you, which monopolized imports of slaves from Africa, sold slaves at public auctions against cash payment. It happened that cash was mostly in the hands of the Jews. The buyers who appeared at the auctions were almost always Jews, and because of this lack of competitors, they could buy slaves at low prices. On the other hand, there also was no competition in the selling of the slaves to the plantation owners and other buyers, and most of them purchased on credit, payable at the next harvest in sugar. Profits up to 300% of the purchase value were often realized with high interest rates. Moving on. On the Caribbean island of Curacao, Dutch Jews may have accounted for the resale of at least 15,000 slaves landed by Dutch transatlantic traders, according to Seymour Drescher, a Jewish historian at the University of Pittsburgh. Jews were so influential in those colonies that slave auctions scheduled to take place on Jewish holidays often were postponed, according to Mark Lee Raphael, a professor of Judaic studies at the College of William and Mary. All right, well, anyway, I'm just trying to give you an idea here that, again, the whole slave trade was obviously done to make a lot of money, and the blacks were the ones who were taken as slaves. And here's an interesting story that people don't understand, too. You know, some blacks actually had slaves, too. And here's a little instance of it that I'm going to bring out here. It says it was not until 1655 that slavery for life became a legally sanctioned institution in the North American colonies. However, in that year, Anthony Johnson, let me highlight this again. Anthony Johnson, a free black Angolian who had been brought up to Virginia as an indentured servant, who had worked off his term of indentured years earlier, he went to court over the ownership of a black servant named John Kazor, who Johnson claimed ownership of, saying that Kazor had been sold to him as a slave for life. Now, let me just explain this. So here's a black man, Anthony Johnson. He was a free black Angolian, I would imagine, slave at one time here. All right. He worked his term off. But what does he do? He gets right back into the trade himself. Notice here this point about what he did, showing that it's true. Corroborating testimony in the case was provided by a Jewish merchant named Captain Samuel Goldsmith, with the court deciding in Johnson's favor, legally recognizing John Kazor as his slave for life, setting the precedent for lifetime slave ownership in the colonies of North America, a peculiar institution that Jewish seafaring merchants and traders soon found extremely profitable. Moving on. By the time of the American Revolution, over 30 Jewish families could be found in Newport, Rhode Island alone, bearing family names such as Lopez, Levy, Rivera, Sextus, De Toro, Gomez, and Hayes. In the New World, the Jews continued to engage in their long-established careers as merchants and moneylenders, manufacturers, and the sellers of alcoholic beverage, and were leaders in the forefront of the slave trade, amassing vast fortunes by importing and selling African slaves to the colonial plantations. All right, so I think you can see the point here that I've been making. This fellow who wrote this article, he gets into it very deeply, who the Jews were, where they came from, how it originated. This picture that you're seeing here is actually a picture of Jerusalem way back when, after the time of Christ, was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. And all the Jews that were captured in Jerusalem, all right, the ones that didn't die anyway, were sent to Europe. All right, they were sent to Europe at that point in time. And eventually, what happened when they got to Europe, they mingled here, okay, in an area where the Khazars lived. So these Jews ended up marrying and intermingling in with the Khazars, all right, and the Jewish religion now was spread all over Europe, all right, but it was, it wasn't a pure Jewish, tribal religion because they were mixed in with all the people in Europe at this point in time. So the thing that happened with them when they were in these countries, because the Jews actually took over, as you can see in the picture here, they took over the money markets, the banking systems, because Christianity did not want to be involved with charging interest to people, so they put the Jews in charge of that. And that's why the Jews in Europe, anyway, took over the money lending, the banks, and eventually what happened there, and I'm just trying to sum this up because this goes on and on and on. The Jews took over the whole trade system routes in Europe, and eventually from the 1400s now, because we know of Columbus coming to the Americas and all this and that, they brought with them, okay, the trade system within. And, when Columbus came to the United States, he basically was lent money by, rich Jews who basically try to get the Dutch West India Company here. Let me show you here. It says the Dutch West India Company, a corporation invested in by a number of wealthy Jewish shareholders, sent 200 Jews to colonize Brazil in 1642. By the mid-1640s, approximately 1,500 Jewish inhabitants resided in the areas of northeastern Brazil controlled by the Dutch, where they established 2 congregations and employed the first rabbi in the Americas. So, again, like I mentioned, how North and South America were taken over by the Dutch West India Company, and part of their company was dealing with slaves and dealing with the Jews. The Jews were the ones in charge of all this. And notice, I'm going to cover this point here. By the late Middle Ages, Jews in Europe had set up trade guilds which functioned as cartels to control and regulate the practice different trades in a particular city. These guilds were similar to unions in that they existed to direct business to those who belonged to them while directing business away from those who were not members. This allowed the Jews to organize themselves and work together to undermine their competition, Gentile business owners. When moving to a new city, Jews would seek out the guild representing their particular profession, whether it was silver or gold, smithing, wine, spirits, the garment industry, stationers, printers, or whatever trade that they made their living at. And the other Jews in the guild would decide whether or not they would allow them to join the guild. If they determined that the person seeking to join the guild was a Jew, they were welcomed as members by their fellow Jews. If they were Gentiles, however, they were usually blackballed and kept out of the guild unless the Jews had a reason for wanting them to join their guild. In other words, if they had connections that they could find useful to Jews. And now, notice, by the early 1600s, there had been several attempts to establish a permanent British colony in North America. for the purpose of securing material riches from the New World. The first of these, the Roanoke Colony, chartered by Sir Walter Raleigh, is what is now North Carolina, in 1584, failed, as had the Popham Colony, which was established in New England in what is now Maine in 1607 by the Plymouth Company, while the Jamestown Colony, also established in 1607 by the London Company in Virginia, survived. Because of the failure of the Popham Colony in New England, which had been abandoned in 1608, the shares of the Plymouth Colony or Company held by its stockholders had plummeted in value. The situation did not go unnoticed by a certain group of financial opportunists who call themselves the Company of Merchant Adventurers, which by that time had become heavily infiltrated by Jewish speculators operating a trade cartel which covered much of Europe and extended overseas. So that's the whole point of all this. What we're dealing with is, this all has to do with money and who controlled it and who controlled the trades. All right? Because between Europe, between South America, between Africa, there was a huge trade route. From Africa came the slaves. What the slave traders brought to Africa was, believe it or not, whiskey and those type of things to them. And then, of course, the whole Jewish trade system operated with each other on these other things that they sold between themselves also. So it was a closed system. In fact, a lot of the Jews in the beginning were Masons, as I'm sure a lot maybe are too today. And the Masons were now part of this cartel group that you really couldn't function, selling any product unless you were part of this cartel. Isn't it interesting how they use the term cartel? So this all had to do with merchants and what they did and how they traded amongst themselves. And here's a picture right there showing the Masons. Again, a lot of these Masons were Jews. All right, a lot of them in the beginning were Jews. And as it says there, a Jewish Masonic officer in blue prepares to instruct the blindfolded initiate being led by the lodge into the mysteries of Freemasonry in an initiation ceremony in the early 19th century. So there you have that, again showing. Here's the guy here, right here with the white on. There's the one person here, the guy in charge, initiating this person into the Mason guild. And there's all the other fellow Masons there. And they had rituals that they had to go through and all that. Notice here, again, dealing with this groups of Jews again. By the time of the American Revolution, over 30 Jewish families could be found in Newport. So I already brought that out before, and there's the names: Lopez, Levy, Rivera, Sextus, De Toro, Gomez, and Hayes. A lot of people don't understand that the slave trade in Newport, Rhode Island was a big thing. In fact, as it went on in Newport, Rhode Island, the first Jewish synagogue was set up there. All right? Because, again, this was going to be a major port. There were 6 or 7 major ports in the United States, and Newport was one of them, where the slave trade continued and the goods were sold throughout, a lot of the world from there. So, anyway, this just brings us up, to today. At that point in time, that, the slave trade in Newport was a big thing, and the Jews were a big part of that slave trade. So I thought, you'd enjoy this article. Again, this article was written by a black fellow, all right, and he had a lot to say in this article. I really encourage you to look at this article. Again, this article is at the website We Thought They Were White.weebly.com. And, it is just absolutely phenomenal. The links and all the things that are tied into slavery that most people don't understand. And once you read this website right here, particularly about the Jewish agenda, what their whole point is. Now, remember what I said in the beginning. The Jews feel that they are God's special people. They feel that they're going to establish in Jerusalem, okay, well, they try to do it over here, but now the Zionists want to establish Jerusalem as their home base for their religious worship, to actually take over the world. I mean, that's what they want to do. And everybody else is just going to be slaves to them. That's what the Jews want. That's their, thing in life here, I guess you could say. I mean, the Zionist Jews, the mom and pop Jew really doesn't even know what's going on here, because they've been just, manipulated by the elite Jews who were, ran the slave trades, who've run, all the merchandise throughout the world, and own all these businesses to do that. And so the typical mom and pop Jew, I call them, really have no clue how they've been just part of this, because they now defend what their so-called brothers and sisters are doing. They don't speak out against it. So I hope that you will go to this website and see how much, or how the Jews have controlled this whole world. They continue to do so. And, they use such things as the Holocaust as a means to manipulate people, enslave people, to make the white people feel like they're obligated to the Jews because of what they feel happened to them during the war. And that's a whole other story, but this article gets into that too. And you can read all about that too, because that's all part of this Jewish control, of the world, and to get the whites, all right, to be part of their indentured servants under them. And that's what they really want to do. I mean, it's just really unbelievable. So again, folks, I hope you enjoy going to this website. There is another website I want to bring your attention to, and that website is The Secret History of the United States. Now, that website is Secret History of the U.S. Okay, .weebly.com. And actually, this fellow, Don Tell, who actually is the one that wrote that information I just quoted from before, he said he got a lot of information from this website. And this is called The Untold Story of America's Founding. So again, that's another website I will put up here if you want to get a better understanding of really how the United States developed. This is really fascinating information, because where we come into it is from the 1850s on, from the Industrial Revolution to the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank. That's where we come on the scene of this, because once you understand how that all came about, the Federal Reserve Bank, and I encourage you, if you want to read more, this article here, like I mentioned, is going to be a great article to know about how all this developed, how the Jews came to the United States again. But the Federal Reserve Bank is a whole other story that I hope you look into, and actually look into a man named Eustace Mullins, Mullins, and read all his information up about the Federal Reserve Bank and how all that is, part of this whole system that keeps us under the Jews. That's what they're doing. They're keeping us under their feet, and they're using race, as a means to divide the white people from the black people, pitting them against each other, making it look like the fight is between those two people, when that's not where the fight is. The fight is between the Jews and everybody else, because the Jews are the ones that are trying to rule the world. And they do rule the world. They control everything. There's nothing that they don't control. I mean, it's as simple as that. They control the media, the banking systems, they control Wall Street, they control all the merchandise that gets sold and bought. But anyway, these articles will bring you up to that. Well, I think I gave you a lot to think about. Again, this all just came about from Dontel Jackson. He's the one that wrote this article originally. Again, here's a black man that feels that putting the blame on whites is not really telling the truth. So he came across this article here, or he wrote this article here, that pretty much explains what happened, with the slave trade, and how the Jews were the ones who were instrumental in organizing it, bringing the slaves from Africa to the United States, and causing all the problems that the blacks complain about now about, their past. And they have, good reason to complain, because what happened to them was not really something that a Christian would do, but it's something that the Jews felt that they could get away with it, and they did. And slavery has been a thing instituted in, many of the countries. There are blacks that are slaves. There are whites that are slaves. I mean, every nationality or group of people at some point in time were, slaves. So there's really not much you can do about it. But the way this interests us is the fact that the slave trade in the United States anyway, was definitely run by the Jews, and no one ever brings this up. Okay, the blacks never bring this up. Dontel Jackson brings it up, but most other people don't bring it up, and really people have to know about it. And this fellow here is doing his best to let people know what happened. I'm doing my best to let people know what happened. And I think it's important that we know history, the truth in history, and not the propaganda and not the lies that are being spread by those who control the media today. So hopefully this has been, eye-opening to you. You learned some things. There's a lot more I didn't touch on in this article or these articles, and I hope that you will do your own investigation of it. Come to your own conclusions. I'm not telling you what to believe, but we do have to understand that when a group of people is responsible for doing something that is very bad, that has harmed more people than any other event in the world, they really have to be taken to task for it. In the slave trade, some people feel that there have been 100 million black people associated and harmed by the slave trade. All right, and a lot of them died. So this is a huge, huge thing in the history of the world, and yet nobody talks about it. Well, anyway, folks, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Jim Rizoli, and I will talk to you another time. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this audio video presentation. Bye now.